South Africa stands at a crossroads. The challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. Leaders in capital, technology, and collaboration come together to cut through the noise and focus on what will truly move the needle. This is where vision meets action, where resilience builds a more investable future, where South Africa is reframed. Welcome to the Alexforbes Hot Topics Dialogue.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage award-winning broadcaster and author Iman Rapeti.
How's that? Can you hear me now? Okay, let's do the voice of God one more time. I only paid him Fundo once.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage award-winning broadcaster and author Iman Rapeti.
Thank you so much. And I know I'm going to love you because you played along with me, and that's not something we often do. So good afternoon. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. I know you were expecting a very different face. I would say a far more beautiful face than mine, and that's really Klavi. Unfortunately, due to, I think, an ongoing strike or some operational difficulties in the US, she wasn't able to make it on time. But how do you think I'm going to do? Thank you. This is my section, my support section in the corner, so I'll be looking at you throughout the afternoon. But on a serious note, thank you very much to Alexforbes for having me, and I hope to acquit myself well in this discussion. It is an important discussion, but I don't want it to be a fussy discussion, because we're people. So I'm hoping that throughout the afternoon, as you hear the points of view of our various experts and you engage in the panel discussion, that you share your questions, that you raise your hand and that you engage. Because I think as South Africans, that's our way, and it will be really wonderful and make our afternoon, I think, vastly more enjoyable if we do it that way. I want to acknowledge that there are 1,200 people, I'm told, in our online audience, so let's give a great woo! Hi! Sorry you couldn't be in the room with us this afternoon, but you're very much included, so keep your comments and your questions coming. So, I was chatting with Luke, who you'll meet a little bit later on. I've been a journalist for more than 25 years in South Africa. I'm hoping some of you have watched something I've done, which is why you were clapping for me in the beginning. But during the course of the 25 years or more, working across various newsrooms, the SABC, Newsroom Africa, ENCA, Talk Radio 702, Power FM, that's where I got the awards. Hence I did earn them, I promise. Thank you. Thank you. I have met a number of people. The stories that are most important to me are the stories of ordinary people, the tragedies and the triumphs of just our neighbors and people that we grew up with in our communities. But I've also interacted with some pretty important people over the years. And, you think of politicians who've had spectacular rises and falls. We've all witnessed those together. I've also covered elections, I've covered economic crises, so you really see the full gamut of human life and human existence. I've interviewed people who've changed the world. You think Richard Branson, Oprah Winfrey, you think Malala Yousafzai. And I've also interviewed people who were hoping and perhaps thought that they did change the world. But the one thing that I've learned from sitting across from power these last 25 or so years, a quarter of a century, which tells you how old I am, is that the most dangerous person in any room is a person who has stopped asking questions. So I hope that in this room, because the combined wealth of our collective intelligence, our experience, is going to prompt us to ask real questions, the kinds of questions that get us somewhere, not the polite ones, not the ones we think our organizations have to say and talk about, but the ones that can push the envelope and take us somewhere dangerous and new. And I'm certain, I'm optimistic, cautiously, see what that we can accomplish that this afternoon. So, the big topic, the marquee topic today is cautiously optimistic, reframing South Africa's future. And I wonder if we can just do a quick show of hands. How many of you are optimistic? As South Africans, I think that maybe all of us are.
Optimistic, yeah.
And that's a really great show of hands. And listen, if you raised your hand, it probably means that you've got lower risk of hypertension. I'm telling you that, it's a scientific fact. I'm telling you that you're going to live longer. I'm also telling you that you probably take fewer sick days. Is that true? And the reason scientists say is because optimists and those who are cautiously optimistic, I guess, for our context, are people whose immune systems are high. It means we're so resilient. It was my birthday the other day, on the 4th of May. Thank you very much. Happy birthday to me. And my kids came into the room with Tigger. So Tigger, who knows Tigger?
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you do. For those of you who don't, it's a delightful children's story. Go ahead and read it. As adults, we should read more children's books. It keeps the fantasy going and the hope and the optimism going. But they brought me Tigger because I'm Tigger in the 100-acre wood. I will see the positive in anything. And I think that represents a lot of South Africans as well. But there's a burden to that optimism because there's an expectation that no matter what happens, people can do the worst thing to you, that you're going to survive, you're going to bounce back and be resilient. And that's kind of abusive, I think. So I think I want to just temper that tone and that term because optimism gets used a lot in South Africa. Sometimes I think that it's something that we learn and we teach ourselves because the alternative is just too heavy. So today we're going to do something that is harder than being optimistic. We are going to be rigorous about it. We're going to ask, what is our optimism actually based on? And what does it demand of all of you, all of us in the room and all of you online? So before we get there, before we talk about capital and growth and where South Africa is headed, we have to reckon with the context within which all of our decision-making is actually taking place today. Because the world in which we're living in this moment, in which you're allocating capital, you're managing risk, and you're leading institutions is not the world of 5 years ago. Name one thing very quickly that didn't exist 5 years ago that you all use every day. Who said AI? But who said ChatGPT? Now we know who's cheating their homework, their financial statements, and their... I'm just kidding. I know everyone is original. But it's one of the things that didn't exist, like Starlink. I know the ideas were embedded years ago, but it didn't exist in the form that it does now. And things are moving at a hyper pace. We need to keep abreast of it, but more importantly, we need to keep ahead of it as well. So to frame what all of this means, not in the abstract, but in the specific reality of what we are doing and attempting to do, I'm delighted, actually, to welcome a thinker who brings both intellectual rigor, but more importantly, practical clarity to our discussion. And that is the CTO of Altron, and you're going to give him an even better welcome than you did me. That's Dr. Andy Mabaso. Woo!
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see all of you. Like Iman said, well, before we do that, let me make sure the slides work, because you never know sometimes when you get up on stage. Like Iman said, my name is Andy Mabaso. I'm the Group CTO at a company called Altron, and it's a pleasure to speak to you all here this afternoon. I started my PhD in 2018, just before I joined my then employer, Standard Bank, and they were kind enough to allow me to finish my PhD in 2020, right? They gave me the time and space. And 1 year after finishing, guess what happened? ChatGPT came out. And I had to catch up like all of you. Everything that we thought was 10 years, 15 years away suddenly happened in the space of a year. And we had to start running. The talk that I'm going to give today will be slightly different. It's not a technical talk, although I can do those, and I do them a lot. It's a more philosophical and maybe business-oriented talk. It's about positioning how you should adopt AI within your own organizations. And the first thing that I want to say about this is your business has not changed. I know it sounds crazy, but your business has not changed. If you're an insurer, you're still selling insurance. If you're a bank, you're still primarily a bank. If you're a tech company, you're still primarily a tech company. What you do today has not changed. You've got the same customers, most likely. You're trying to grow those customers, and you're trying to keep them happy. Number two, you've got employees, right? Customers are happy. Generally, it's because of happy employees. So you're trying to make sure that they are empowered as well. So your business has not changed. I've heard it a lot that because of AI, we suddenly have to change our business, new business models, etc. I'm here to tell you that's not true necessarily. You've all heard the stories. I'm not even going to read the numbers. Everyone is adopting AI. 90% of all FSIs will be in AI in some way, shape, or form by the end of this year. You've heard the stories. If you adopt AI, apparently you'll have 6 times higher shareholder returns than your shareholders. But why is it that the returns on investment that so many people are looking for are not necessarily coming? Right? Who has 6 times higher shareholder returns because of AI in their organizations? I'm looking for the brave person that can raise their hand. Right? Hardly any of us. Most people, I would say that they're saying that we're actually spending a lot of money, but we're seeing very little return at the moment with regards to AI. So I'm going to attempt to tell you why I think that is the case. Now, what does AI mean for FSI in general, but this could apply to any organization really? It's about advice. We are told that you can give better advice to your customers or your members. It's about engaging your customers or your members even better than you have before. It's about getting broader insights and analytics, right? But we also know there are new risks that get introduced with AI, right? There's new biases that can come into the organization. There's new risks in terms of your reputation as an organization that often get introduced when you start to go down the journey of AI. What I'm here to tell you today is I want every single one of us to stop chasing AI tools. Stop chasing AI tools. The most obstructive thing you can do for your business is a shiny new tool with no clear problem to be solved. I know that's not something that you hear often from somebody that's a supposed AI expert, but stop doing that. It's a distraction. If the only tool that you have, you often heard this said, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, then everything starts to look like a nail. And so we start to go around with our hammers, hammering everything. We use catchphrases, AI everywhere. Get AI in my organization right now. What are you trying to do? AI is one powerful tool, one new powerful tool in your toolkit, but it's not a replacement for your entire toolbox. Some problems that look like AI at first aren't even AI. It's just good old classical process engineering, software engineering, etc. Just good business practice. And often people throw that out the window because there's a new tool and I have to make sure that I can hammer everything with this new tool. The discipline, I think, for most organizations today is knowing when to use AI. That is a difficult thing. And it actually turns out it becomes a leadership problem. Like anything else in business, it becomes a leadership problem. Now, let me take you through a little bit of the technology waves, right? A bit of a reflection. When COVID happened, we all had to suddenly work from home. We couldn't go to the office. We were introduced to something called Microsoft Teams and Zoom, etc. You couldn't go out necessarily to go and buy food at the local spa, and suddenly we had to use these apps, right, that delivered food to our houses and so forth. They all needed cloud computing to happen, right? That's what cloud computing brought us. It brought us remote working, and it brought us scalability, because suddenly all these apps were getting so much volume, and they needed somewhere to scale, and suddenly the purpose of cloud was very, very clear. Similar thing happened with mobile devices, right? And these are not necessarily in any order. Mobile devices gave us access. We can reach you wherever you are. You can be at the beach. If we need you at the office, we can Teams call you, right? That's what it gave us. It made us be able to work from wherever we are and take our work home with us. So now you have to pause and think, what is it that AI is primarily enabling in our businesses today? What is it primarily enabling in our business that we could not necessarily do before? My hypothesis this afternoon is that it's giving us automation and intelligence at the core of the business. is giving us automation and intelligence at the core of the business. Suddenly, where we could just automate, we can now automate with intelligence. And you can just think deeply about, what does that mean for my business? If I can now automate with intelligence, what does that mean for the way that I run my business operations? I want to separate two distinctions between AI. The first one I call productivity AI. That's what most of you are probably using today, right? You're probably using some version of Anthropic's Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, maybe even Microsoft's Copilot, right? Many of you would use it to write your emails, write your Excel reports, maybe, summarizing policy documents, research Q&A, meeting notes, drafts, etc. We all use AI in this form. And when people say they've adopted AI, they're generally talking about productivity AI. It's the stuff on the left-hand side. And that's great. It has some value, but it's primarily about empowering the individual. There's a difference between that and operational AI. Operational AI is AI that's deployed at the core of the business, at the core of the operation itself. Operational AI is purpose-built. It is fine-tuned, and it is agentic. It is about making decisions at the core of your business. So think about things like member self-service at scale. Think about things like fraud detection and risk management. Think about claims and back-office automation, portfolio analytics, document automation and processing. These are all examples of operational AI, and they're quite distinct from productivity AI. Now, at Altron, we serve probably 80% of the top 100 in the JSE, and the number one mistake that many of our customers make is they take chatbots, the ones that you have on your phone, because they're so accessible, and we try and plug them into an operational environment. And what happens? You introduce risk, you introduce cost, and a whole lot of other things where you end up having unintended consequences. And that's the challenge today that we see with the ROI not being delivered from AI. So operational AI, like I said, is things like back-office automation, fraud, risk, and intelligence, things like sentiment analysis. These are very specific, bespoke things. These AIs can't tell jokes. They can't program. They can only do one thing and one thing well. If there's one key message I want you to take away, it is that operational AI is purpose-built. It does one thing and one thing well, because at the core of your business, you can't afford mistakes. You can't afford hallucinations. It has to be purpose-built. So productivity AI gives your people superpowers, but operational AI transforms how your business works. Remember, it doesn't change what your business does. Same customers, same products most likely, but you're trying to enhance how you deliver that product. You're trying to make it perhaps cheaper, much more satisfactory, deliver it more on time for your customers. So the fundamentals don't change, but what you're doing, how you deliver it, may be enhanced and improved by AI. So both matter, but they require completely different investment logic and success metrics. And I believe this is where leadership comes in. I believe every single one of you in this room today have an important role to play. So I like to frame it in this way, that you could adopt AI in two ways. You could adopt it with a scarcity mindset, or you could adopt it with an abundance mindset. A scarcity mindset says, how can we reduce headcount by using AI? How can we trim costs by using AI and remove inefficiency in the business? And sometimes those things are important, but let it be so because of the ordinary course of business, not because of AI. You see, the unintended message that comes from this type of mindset is that you drive fear into the organization. The very people that you're trying to transform start to become resistant. And you end up with what I call pilot purgatory. Lots and lots of AI use cases, but very little return. Why? Because no one is really adopting it. Because your goal is to cut headcount. No one is really adopting it in your organization with that belief in mind. Contrast this to an abundance mindset. An abundance mindset says, well, we should be able to do more with AI. If AI is going to transform how we deliver and make us deliver even better, even more on time, then we should be in an era of abundance. So how can we empower our people to do more? How can we reimagine how we're delivering our services to our customers? And how can we serve members better at scale? Those are the types of questions that one should be asking in an abundance mindset. And when you choose abundance, you grow your business. And by definition, that means that you probably likely need more empowered people, not less, more empowered people that come to work for you within your own organization. So leadership and human judgment are now more important than ever. They really are. They really are. Ethics is not something that you need to think about after the fact. I know most of you probably have this massive AI ethics boards that sit at the end when everything has been built. It's the wrong way around. How about taking an ethics champion and embedding them right as they build so that your AI is built together with everything that you're trying to do for your organization? Governance embedded in how your project teams actually deliver. And you know the most important thing? Trust. Trust. I'm a client of Alexforbes, mostly because all of the corporates that I've worked for happen to be clients of Alexforbes as well. But I trust them. I know Davi. I know the leadership team. I trust them with my finances and that of my family. So the way that they ought to be adopting AI should be in a way that enhances trust, my trust in them as a client. So the way that you adopt AI, always ask that question, how does this contribute to trust? How does it make my customers trust me even more? How do I add to my brand equity? Because you can't do it in a subtractive way. You can't do it in such a way that you can actually, destroy your brand. So this becomes a leadership problem. It becomes a leadership issue. So the result of integrating AI in this way, for me, is about reshaping how leaders think about it. As opposed to decisions based on a small amount of data, AI can now give us better leverage, where we can make decisions based on complete signal coverage. Where before we could be reactive, all it's doing is now giving us the ability to be much more proactive in how we react to changing macroeconomic environments. Where we used to have human judgment on very routine cases, we can now reserve the best of our people for the most complex cases, the cases where we really need to close the deal, save a customer, turn something around. That's where we can now focus our human insight. Human insight for me becomes even more pronounced in the era of AI, where intelligence at the routine level can be commoditized. Where advice is driven by what, you move away from advice driven by what advisors remember to advice, given in real time based on what a customer is actually asking for. One last takeaway before I step down the stage. Your AI adoption roadmap needs to have 4 pillars. It needs to have 4 pillars. And the first 2 are about people. I wrote an article a year ago titled, AI Adoption is About People. And it always starts there. It's a cultural issue. AI-empowered leaders, we need to make sure that your organization has the employees, the leadership, even your board empowered with AI. They need to understand what it's about, what the risks are about, how they can use it, how they can leverage it to better enhance what they do in their own businesses. If you don't start there, you will have resistance from the top, and that will not go anywhere. The second one that's equally important is an AI-empowered employee base. It's when you start asking the question, how do I empower my employees using AI, and not to start talking about cutting costs, because again, when you lead with that message, you leave with a culture of fear, and then you create resistance in the employee base. So how do I empower my employees to do more with what they have so that I can deliver better to my customers? That's the second pillar that you need to think about. The third and fourth pillar are what most people get excited about, what most IT professionals get excited about. How do I then embed AI within my operations? And how do I deliver better services to my customers by leveraging AI? Those for me are the simpler things. But where you need to start is number 1 and number 2. So in summary, source the right problems to be solved by AI. And remember, not every problem is AI. It is just one new tool in your toolbox. Not everything has to be AE-fied, if there's such a word. Secondly, once you've sourced it, solve it, right? Before you introduce AI, how would this be solved ideally? How would you ideally solve this problem? And then thirdly, then implement AI in a sprint so that you can prove that there is ROI in what it is that you're trying to do. Only then can you then scale that particular initiative across your organization to ensure that you can better deliver services to your customers. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Don't go.
All right.
I have a question for
Yes.
you. So, I mean, that's great because I think a lot of people in this room and some people have already put up their hands that they use some form of, when we talk about AI, we're really talking about the LLMs, right? The large language models, talking about your Claudes and your chat GPTs and your notebook LMs. It's not fully inclusive. But that word inclusivity is important.
Yes.
Because AI to me is like the iceberg. What you see at the top is only a fraction of what's not represented at the bottom. It doesn't include everybody's language. So it doesn't include scholarship from languages and theories and research that are done in other languages besides English.
Correct.
Talk to me about your concerns around the inherent biases that all this wonderful AI is coming with and showing us perhaps a parochial view of the world, not the full picture.
Correct. You know, AI reflects the culture in which it was trained in. And how do you capture that culture? It's in the data sets, right? Most of the AI that we use is American-based, right? Which means that the context in which it's trained is American in nature. So some of the advice that you're getting as you prepare your reports, etc., ask yourself that question: is this really relevant to my environment? It's fascinating to me that we tend to turn off our ability to think just because the AI told me so. For me, it's the other way around. It's like, well, thank you for your advice. Now let me apply my thinking, my mind, to what the outcome should be. I advocate for African AI, which means using our own data sets to train AI models. In fact, even in an organizational context, you should be advocating for the same. You are all sitting on massive amounts of data. Train your AI on your data sets, because then it's bespoke for you, for your own organization. Then you can remove those inherent biases.
Thank you so much. I thought that was a really important point.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let's do a human handshake.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So that was great, and thank you very much for that. By the way,
thank you.
Sam Altman, everybody knows Sam Altman? OpenAI dude, clever, rich guy. South Africans are very polite, can we agree? Like, I was somewhere new the other day, and maybe just because it's me, because I smile at everyone, and they're like, oh, you look so amazing. And I was like, oh, you look so amazing. And then I was like, oh, thank you. And they were like, thank you. Typically, manners are very much a part of us as South Africans. And I think it's creeping into the way that you use your AI. Be honest with me now. How many of you say please and thank you when you do a search? Almost the whole room. But here's the problem with that. So Sam Altman says that last year, starting or ending prompts in pleases and thank yous is costing OpenAI millions, if not billions, in computing power. Because they eat up processing cycles. And I think this was something important that I wanted to include as well, that I wanted to share with you. OpenAI's operational costs exceed $700,000 to millions per day. And that's for the cooling, for the electricity, and of course we all know about NVIDIA's those massive processors that they have. So please think twice. And by the way, the other thing that's also important, please. The other thing that's also important is that when you do that, it actually changes the tonality of the search search result that you're getting in the data or the question that you ask. So again, I know it feels hard. I struggled with that at the beginning, but now I'm very proud to announce that I'm over my please and thank you era with these chatbots, and I'm just being cold, hard, and demanding, and it gives me everything that I need. Okay, the man who's about to give us, well, I should say he gives us everything we need every day. How many of you do read the Business Day? I think a fair amount of us. I was working at the Business Day at one point when Peter Bruce was still the editor. They have a new guy at the helm. He's actually quite new, 6 months into the job. And I think it is an important role that Luke Feltham has stepped into as editor-in-chief of the Business Day, 6 months in, as I say, because his role and the role of his entire team is to keep us close to all of these convergent events that tell us about our world. And they have excellent columnists and a great perspective on where South Africa sits in relation to what we see is just horrific and changing geopolitics all the time. So please give him a wonderful welcome, Luke Feltham. And then the mic missed the most important part. Look, you have to say it again. I'm just kidding.
It's not me. All right. Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, alrighty. Afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege to welcome you here today. There are some truly incredible people in this room, and I'm honored to share it with all of you. As Business Day, we are proud to have our name attached to occasions such as this. We are a legacy newspaper. Naturally, that means we are driven by the belief that is robust discourse and the free sharing of ideas that are the fuel of our country. Now, I have to confess something. Personally, I've been intrigued by the increasing use of the phrase at the heart of today's question, cautiously optimistic. Any idealist or romantic will tell you that optimism does not usually have a qualifier attached to it. If anything, optimism is the antithesis of caution. It is the full-blooded surrender to hope and what we perceive as possible. I don't know if there are any Arsenal or Orlando Pirates fans here today, but I can assure you, none of them are cautiously optimistic about their chances this weekend. I first noticed the phrase entering into the South African lexicon sometime last year. Our national picture was increasingly being colored by good news and positive economic indicators. But we resisted the full embrace of optimism. We were and remain cautious. And I think the reason is that we have all been hurt when we allow ourselves to hope without reservation. But we are a nation that has had hope woven into the fabric of who we are. The promise of a better life for all was the central idea in overcoming a shameful past. And I am certain that we will remain loyal to that dream. And as such, we have no choice but to welcome optimism back into our lives. With that said, as philosophical as we can get in journalism, I'm not ignorant to the fact that the country's financial infrastructure relies on a realistic outlook, one that is not influenced by sentiment. But still, having said that, it remains my hope that with the caliber of leaders in this room, caution will be banished from optimism forever. Again, it's my pleasure to officially welcome you to this afternoon's discussion. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here. Thank you very much. Can you run away before I get asked the question?
Wow, look, that was so quick. I mean, I'm just interested, in this context of so much news happening, and just overnight, we saw the stunning events in Kwaggafontein Magistrates Court yesterday, with a case, a really important case being struck off the roll, and we won't talk about it here. But how do you decide what picture you want to show South Africans and those who are beyond our borders reading your work every single day? What are some of the things that inform those choices that you make?
Well, fortunately, we don't have the burden of choosing the picture ourselves at Business Day. It is our job as journalists to reflect the news as it appears and reality and current events as it appears. That being said, my hope as a citizen rather than a journalist is, again, that picture is always rosy. Well, look, it won't always be rosy, but at the same time, again, I'm not quite a born free. I missed that by a few years, but I was very much ingratiated into that sense of optimism. And I feel, again, this country has a lot to offer. And as Business Day, a lot of people these days consume our product primarily at the airport, and it's something that we've been very proud of. And you mentioned Peter Bruce, actually, and he always phrases it to me as the Business Day should be the South African dream when you land at OR Tambo. And that's very much what I see our mission.
And again, good luck to you and your team as you go ahead. These are not easy days for journalists, especially when we're not as funded and well-resourced as we'd love to be. Maybe you guys are more than others. I don't know, Luke. But thank you very much for the work that you put in every single day. I'll walk down with you. All right, our next speaker is somebody who is certainly formidable, especially given the work that she does. She is the chief economist here at Alexforbes, and it's Mpho Molopiane. Now, Mpho is a specialist at macroeconomic strategy. In a previous life at banking and at the Treasury, she certainly has built experience over the years, and she's somebody who's known as having a solid head on her shoulders. I was going to crack a joke, but it's going to be a mom joke, and then I thought better of it. Do you want it? I'm not hearing enthusiasm. So there's a joke about, how many macroeconomists does it take to change a light bulb? 7 plus minus 10. Laugh as hard as you can, but clap also. Here's Mpho Molopiane.
Thanks for that introduction. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm standing between you and lunch, you know that, right? So, I'm surprised that they've given an economist 15 minutes to speak. I'm not too sure. I mean, with so much going on, come on, I need to opine on each and everything, right? Today, however, I have been given a strict mandate to talk about volatility and how that affects investments. A lot would argue that, well, what's the fuss about? Volatility is not new, Why are we calling it the new normal? But the problem is not that volatility is new, it's that it's persistent. And it's important for us to recognize that the old regime, which was characterized by a macroeconomic environment that had low inflation and low interest rate, is changing. And we have moved into a world of geoeconomic and geographic fragmentation, with shocks being a lot more persistent and less foreseeable. What am I talking about? I'm an economist, of course. I brought proof of the data. The chart that you're looking at here essentially shows the annual average volatility since 2010. And we can see here the two lines show you that volatility in this period has moved a step higher. And if anything, the shocks have been a lot more persistent. If you just think over the past couple of years alone, we've had to contend with COVID, we had the Russia-Ukraine war, just as we were getting comfortable with, working from home, as well as going to the office a few days, we then had to contend with the Russia-Ukraine war. And then a few years later, it was the tariffs. And then let's not forget, before the tariffs, remember, we had the election upsets. Then we had the tariffs. As if that was not enough, we now have to contend with the second war. So that is the world that we have moved into, characterized by geoeconomic fragmentation. What this suggests is that uncertainty and volatility is no longer cyclical noise. They are more structural. And what this means for us as investors is that investment frameworks built for stability must now be rebuilt for regime uncertainty. Let's take the war in the Middle East as an example. Of course, I had to sneak this in. I'm not going to go into the characteristics of the war in the Middle East. I'm just going to assume that we are all acquainted with our geography now. But what we have with the war in the Middle East is that it has been characterized as the largest supply shock in the history of the global oil markets, right? And you can see there, the chart on the left, it shows you the loss in supply, the initial loss in supply the global economy has suffered. And it's way larger than all the other supply shocks that we have seen before. Now, the important point I want to bring in here is that with this type of uncertainty and volatility, is that it can quickly change the macroeconomic backdrop. And that's important because when we make investment decisions in terms of how we're going to position portfolios, we embed the macroeconomic outlook in it. But what the war did is that it overnight changed the macroeconomic outlook. We came into the year expecting interest rate cuts, and now we're talking about interest rate hikes, given the inflation-induced shock and nature of the oil supply loss. South Africa, similarly, has been affected, and we've seen a sharp increase in fuel prices. Now, yes, the government support has, somewhat reduced that impact, but even in that situation, we're still expecting inflation to increase. And analysts are talking about inflation possibly reaching 5%, which is way higher than the sub 3% inflation target that they introduced last year, and we were all so excited about. What this means is that the SARB may unfortunately have to hike policy rates, some analysts saying as early as the May meeting. Now, there's a completely different macroeconomic backdrop we came into the year expecting, where we were talking about an additional 50 to 75 basis points worth of cuts. The important point here that I'm trying to make is that the war in the Middle East should not be seen in isolation. It should be seen in the broader context of an economy and a global order that is fragmenting. And the rivalry between the US as well as China, the AI, race, and dominance, as well as energy security and issues of data sustainability in advanced economies will continue to drive structural uncertainty and volatility. I must admit, as somebody who's been looking at South Africa and Africa for quite some time, I'm quite surprised that we are now discussing debt sustainability in advanced economies. This is massive, right? But getting back to my points, what this means is that while all these structural changes and noise and uncertainty is making for a noisy macroeconomic environment, new opportunities are also emerging. The investment implications are massive. One, we need to come to terms with uncertainty and volatility. But more importantly, the issue of data sustainability in advanced economies, what that is creating is that it is distorting those equity and bond market correlations. So, you'd usually expect that when equity markets sell off, bonds gain, because you do expect that government is going to step in and provide that support, providing a nice cushion for portfolios. Now, while that is the case, the problem is that, yes, while governments have to step in and provide that support, the problem is that because of already high debt levels, investors continue to request much higher premiums. So now you have a situation where both bonds and equities sell off at the same time, creating much larger drawdowns in portfolios. Now, this means that we need to think beyond the 60-40 portfolio, right? But as I indicated, new opportunities are emerging, such as a greater role for alternatives as well as infrastructure in portfolios. Most importantly, for investors, the goal is not to predict the future, but to plan for uncertainty through purposeful diversification. Purposeful diversification, I say. What am I talking about? Now, for us as investors, what's important is that we build portfolios that can withstand the test of time and ensure that members do not panic when volatility and uncertainty erupts. Now, I'd like to give you an example of what I'm talking about by using the analogy of a stained glass window. One of the mesmerizing things when you walk into a cathedral are the stained glass windows, right? Not only are they beautiful, but you can't help but wonder the craftsmanship that went into making the windows withstand the test of time, right? They last centuries. And in addition to that, they are resistant to weathering as well as fading. Now, when you build a stained glass window, just going to take you through the process and how it fits into how we think about purposeful diversification. So one of the first steps is you need to select the number of panes you're going to use. Now, if you select one window, that points to concentration risk. One hit and everything shatters, right? But if you choose more window panes, then that hit becomes contained. In our world, the windows signify asset allocation. And the more windows we have, it means the more asset classes we can tap into. And that is essential for us because what that enables us to do in the portfolios is that it enables the portfolios to be a lot more resistant to just one shock, right? So we are diversified across multiple asset classes as well as across geographies. Now that's the first step. The next step, after you've selected the number of windows that you're going to use, you then need to select the shape to try and bring the design to life. Each shape in our world reflects the investment styles that we incorporate in our portfolios. And essentially, each investment style performs differently in each economic cycle, in each market condition. This enables us to blend the styles in such a manner that the portfolio can deliver smoother returns across multiple market conditions. The last layer that we then incorporate is to bring the design to life, and this is adding color. By adding color, we then have to select asset managers, and that's what the color signifies here. And we select managers with rigorous research as well as rigorous processes that we put them through. And we select the manager that is best placed to execute on the style that we want incorporated in the portfolios. Now, you might be saying, oh, Mpho, there's a lot going on here. Talked about a lot of things, and this picture that you have here, I don't even know what you're working towards, right? But each and every process is intentional. And that is to ensure that the portfolio is able to deliver a smoother return profile over different macroeconomic conditions. And that is purposeful diversification. And that is the Alexforbes way. Now, you might be saying, well, hi, Mpho. Yeah, that's a nice story. I hear you. In my world, in my street lingo, they would say, here, but anyway. But I've got backup. I'm an economist, after all. Came with data again. What you're looking at here is that it shows you the performance of our flagship portfolio, Performer. And we've contrasted that with performance relative to other multi-managers as well as single managers. And what you see here is that Performer is always top quartile across different time periods and across different macroeconomic conditions. Now, top quartile does not necessarily mean a good year. What it does mean is that it points to consistency, and that consistency is the proof point. And this also shows you that diversification is not accidental, it is purposeful. Thank you.
I was mesmerized by everything that you shared with us. I want to pick up perhaps one or 2 points, because we said we're going to have a deeply honest conversation. And I hear what you're saying. We can't always predict the headwinds. I mean, who would have thought that the war, and we're calling it the Middle East, by the way, it's a very large territory. It was a war between, Israel, Iran, and, between Israel, America, and Iran, a war that they that they waged against Iran. And it led to this moment that nobody could have anticipated because of the erratic nature of the way the Trump administration deploys its foreign policy, or not, some might say. It's not a foreign policy. So when you talk about purposeful diversification in an atmosphere that is so subject to shock, in the context of a legal framework that is quite prohibitive when you think of Section 28, Section 28.
Yeah.
And the limitations that it places on how you deploy money and to which asset classes. So, I mean, how much room do you really have to maneuver then, realistically and honestly speaking?
Well, realistically, you do have quite a bit of room to maneuver, right? So firstly, Reg 28, because there's two
Sorry,
things
I'm
that
stuck on
talk about...
Section 89 of the impeachment, so rule,
okay.
rule 28.
Reg 28, yes, yeah. So what that allows is that it does give you prescription, right, in terms of how much you can put in various asset classes. And then further to that, it also gives you like a limit in terms of how much you can put offshore. And that's where the regional diversification comes in, is that we are able to pull that lever from a regional perspective, but in addition to that, across various asset classes. The other recent additions to Reg 28 as well has been an allowance for pension funds to be able to invest in infrastructure. So as I indicated, that it's a lot more volatile world. You know, that 60-40 split that we used to talk about doesn't necessarily give you that protection. But at the same time, laws are also evolving. And as they evolve, we adapt quickly to be able to take advantage of those opportunities.
So what's the message to somebody who's got their money tied up with you for retirement, thinking, I'm trusting these people to navigate, should I wear my seatbelt? I mean, how do you reassure them that money will be made, decisions, money will be deployed to the correct asset classes, the right diversification decisions are going to be made in terms of those investments, but they're going to be safe and come out at the end with their expectations intact?
Well, I mean, firstly, I think everybody should always be wearing a seatbelt. But, you know, as Avi and Bushi are going to touch on, is around that advice framework, right? So yes, we are handling and investing members' money, but at the same time, they also have access to advisors. And, you know, if you're worried, you pick up the phone, you email, you sit with an advisor to say, please take me through, how do I navigate this volatile situation? How much should I be having in liquid assets? And how much should I, you know, be putting away in various portfolios to ensure that I still meet my retirement's outcomes?
Mpho, thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think you've set up the perfect segue for our next two speakers. And I think just listening to what you're saying and what we've heard so far, anyone who's got money tied up in, or investments tied up in retirements, would also have to change. Like, the client is not of my mother's era and age or generation anymore. We also have to have a certain level of agility, have our expectations tweaked, I guess, in the way that we approach how we save for retirement, or where our money goes and how it's invested. But I want to bring up Avishal Seeth and Butsi Tladi. They know way more than anyone, I guess, in the room about this. Butsi is the corporate CEO of Alexforbes, and Avishal deals with executive retirement. And they will take us into a deep dive of how your members navigate their work, navigate their health, as well as how they navigate their wealth in this moment. So welcome to the two of you.
Gymming in the morning. Plastic.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Probably glass.
Obviously, there's not enough room for all. I think that's a speaker, the mic at the back. Can everybody hear me? Am I on?
No, no.
Not. Now?
No.
Still not on. This is on. Now you can hear me, I'm sure.
No.
Okay, cool. Okay, we're going to start. Buchi.
Anybody can hear me now? Am I audible? Yes, we can kick off. So very brave of you, man, to think you can give Avishal and me this amount of time and we can keep to it. We will ignore that. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As always, great to spend time with you, our clients and friends. So what we're going to do in this part of the discussion this afternoon is to join the dots. Join the dots from everything that we've heard so far, from AI to global markets, but in particular, how all of this manifests in the place of work, how it impacts on individuals, how it impacts on employers, and ultimately, how it impacts on member outcomes. But perhaps before we get into that, Avi, do you want to maybe tell us why all of this matters? It's still not. Okay.
Still not. Okay, sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Now I'm here. Okay. Thanks, Buchi. We've heard two powerful perspectives this morning. The first being how technology, specifically AI, is impacting decision-making in our world. And the second thing Mpho just spoke about being uncertainty and the global economic volatility, also impacting us in many, many ways. Buchi, for me, the real question is, how does this impact and what does this mean for the average member of a retirement fund, of a medical scheme, or employee of your company? Because ultimately it lands in one place, right? The financial, physical, and emotional well-being of individuals.
Correct. So what we are observing are three structural shifts. And the first one is one that is well articulated, this technological acceleration. And it is not just impacting how businesses operate, but it's also about how individuals are making decisions within that. The second shift worth mentioning this afternoon, it is around behavioral complexity. And we'll come back to visit this theme later in the discussion. More than ever before, we've got so much information available to us. We can hardly move from one room to the next without digesting some form of information. I can even put it to you that as you sit there, you've already engaged and you kind of with us, but also engaging with something as we have this discussion.
Facebook.
Checking Facebook, checking whether we are on LinkedIn, and posting that you're here as well, perhaps. So we have more information than ever before, but not necessarily better information. Because not all of us are trained journalists, but all of us are creating content. Right. The other shift that we also wanted to explore this afternoon was this notion of longevity. We are certainly living longer, but not necessarily healthier. Right. These three forces are interacting with each other. Technology is shaping behavior, and behavior is shaping financial outcomes, and longevity is increasing the risk of getting those decisions wrong. We cannot afford to get those decisions wrong in terms of the outcomes that we're looking for. Misinformation and disinformation are now ranked among the top global risks. And all of these have got direct implications in terms of the outcomes that members will get. Because where are we getting the information that we are basing our decisions on?
Great points, Buchi. At Alexforbes, we've got a very fortunate vantage point. And why do I say that? We administer and advise over 1.3 million members of retirement funds. What does this data tell us? And we've heard all of this, quite a lot of it before. We know that most South Africans and globally, people are not ready for sufficient income in retirement. They're not going to be able to retire well. So, Mercer, the OECD confirms this. It's just that in South Africa, in our socioeconomic environment, the margin for error is tiny. Okay, so we've got 1.3 million members under administration, under our advice. Our responsibility is actually far wider than these 1.3 million members. It's 1.3 million employed people. In our socioeconomic environment, they're looking after parents, children, siblings, extended family, and friends. So the socioeconomic environment means that the margin of error is absolutely tiny. And this results in low preservation rates, early withdrawals, contribution gaps, and all of these things impact poor long-term outcomes. A good example of how socioeconomic environment impacts member behavior is our two-pot experience since 1 September 2024 when the two-pot legislation was introduced. So in total, we've had over 1 million claims since 1 September 2024. Total value of these claims, over 14 billion rand. All right, now, over the long term, this was expected. So our modeling over the long term was actually accurate. We expected lots of claims. This next slide is not what we expected. So this shows the claims month by month since September 2024. You'll see that when two-pot was introduced, we had 240,000 claims in the month of September alone. And you can see the next spike is in March 2025. Why? Because that's when members could access their two-pot savings again in the new tax year. If we go to March this year, you see another massive spike. Why? The start of a new tax year, you're able to access your savings again. So over the long term, yes, we expected these volumes of claims. But what we're seeing is repeat claimants. So 67% of claimants in the first 2 years were repeat claimants. And as soon as the money is available, we want that money. We want it right now. Even though it's going to be available the whole year, we want it as soon as it's available. And that talks to the socioeconomic challenges that we face as South Africans. The most important thing that our data is telling us is that behavior is critical, and it matters more than ever. Because, before, and we still do that, what we worry about is asset allocation, manager selection, performance of our administration systems. What we need to look at and focus more on now is behavior. It's equally, if not more important, because members aren't making decisions based on the communication and information we provide them. It's about social media, the AI-generated content, targeted marketing, and misinformation. So our challenge is no longer, do people have information? Because they've got so much information. It's can they distinguish between good advice and bad advice? Because this is where outcomes are being determined.
What Avishal is not going into is the watch parties that were waiting on the day that the new tax year started. People waiting at midnight to access their two pots. That is the type of behavior that we're seeing. It is about what can I get today, can I get to it, and can I access it? But I guess what's important in terms of what we're seeing is that the role of the employer has also fundamentally shifted. In the traditional model, employers provided benefits.
Yep.
And by and large also assumed some level of responsibility in terms of the outcomes. Very different from what we are seeing now. As that has shifted to individuals themselves having more flexibility and also assuming some of the responsibility for the outcomes, we're saying that our new realities and the role of the employer in this new reality has to be about enabling better decisions. Because even the best designed fund that many of us spend time ensuring that we've got will not, members within that fund, if they continue to make poor decisions, will not have better outcomes. So it is not just about ensuring that the fund exists, that it's well designed, it ensures that we can get there. It is about enabling the type of decisions that members are making. So the notion of advice, of continued engagement with your scheme. And the great thing about two-pot, among others, is that members are now interested about what is in their fund. Up until now, many of us trusted our employers, we trusted our board of trustees. We would not look necessarily at our fund until we're closer to retirement. But now with two-pot, we're continuously checking. We know it is, Avi, how many of our members found us as Alexforbes since two-pot has come around?
Yeah.
We've truly, we're living up to our dream of being a retail player. So members have found us because they're continuously checking what their savings pot look like. But that notion of advice, of engagement, of ensuring that members continue to make the right decisions is important. Good. Oh, I guess it's time for another reality check, and this is mine. So at Alexforbes, we also look after the health advisory as well as health risk management of another 1 million members. And for a moment now, park that which is happening in the public sector. That's a discussion for another day. Just focus in terms of the benefits that you and your colleagues have. What we are seeing there is a system under tremendous pressure. And where some of that pressure is coming from, just in terms of the medical inflation itself, I don't know what your salary increases are like in your employers, but generally inflation is low, and salary inflation is a little bit lower than what we've seen. But medical scheme inflation is around 10%. You can already see the gap, that in terms of cost, healthcare takes up a little bit more every year in terms of the income that comes into families. So medical inflation is outpacing CPI. What we're also seeing, it's certainly the rising prevalence of chronic conditions, including mental health. We are seeing it in our client base, and hopefully you're also experiencing within the employers that you are part of. What we're also seeing is increasingly complex benefit structures. We probably advise on over 200 different options. And sometimes employers think that by giving more options, we're solving a problem. But what we're seeing is just increased complexity within that. So healthcare is becoming one of the most significant costs that individuals incur, and it gets worse when one goes into retirement. So globally, we also are seeing that we are living longer, but not necessarily healthier. We've got more years in retirement, but what are all those years, additional years that we get in retirement? What is it all worth if we're not ensuring that we're safe from debilitating disease in itself? So what we probably need to be considering is how do we ensure that we increase what's called our health span, the number of years that we have of good health. What we're also seeing in the data that's coming through and the experience of within our client base is that this gap is increasing, and it's a very expensive gap, because our retirees tell us that the biggest expense in retirement is healthcare. However, it is also one of the least planned for. So our view is increasingly becoming one that says that the biggest risk that you face in terms of retirement adequacy is not markets necessarily. We've got that well taken care of. I want to put it to you that it is health.
And this is where advice is critical. So we've viewed retirement, we've viewed healthcare, we've viewed individual financial advice as separate systems in the past. And we know that that's not correct. We need to integrate these into a single system because they are interconnected. So if you are financially unwell, it creates stress. That stress affects your general health. When it affects your general health, it affects your productivity, your ability to work. And that in turn affects your income. It creates this vicious circle. This integration of these different systems is critical, and we need to manage these things together. Otherwise, outcomes are going to suffer even more.
Oh, another shift that is worth mentioning this afternoon is what we're calling a shift towards individualization. Traditional models, again, assume standardization. Hey, but people are not averages. People are not the same. I'm told the average family size in the world now remains at 4.5. I'm still to see that 0.5 person running around. But people are not averages. People are individuals. And our view is that outcomes are increasingly depending on how well we understand these differences. We are at different levels in terms of our financial literacy, understanding of this complex financial complexity. The ability in which we are able to assume risk, our risk appetite is also different. Our health status is different. Our financial structures is different. And it is in understanding these differences that we're able to inform the type of outcomes that are specific to you and your family.
Agreed, Buchi.
All right. Yeah. So what we're increasingly talking about, it is advice for all members. It is not just advice for members who ask for that advice, not just those that are high income earners, but advice that is scalable, it is accessible, and it is relevant across the entire employee base. And technology, including AI, among others, is enabling this. And we're really excited about how we can then embed that within our own advice frameworks. But, as mentioned earlier, it has to be built on trust.
100%. When it comes to advice, we've seen a new trend in the industry, and this trend is consolidation. So globally, we're seeing that advisors are either being acquired by product providers or becoming product providers themselves in searching for profitability, for margin. Now, advice is no longer always independent, and independence is key. In a world where AI is targeting individuals, we've seen that, social media and information can be manipulated. The importance of independent, objective advice increases significantly. There is a trust deficit.
Definitely.
And there's been a trust deficit for a long time. The research shows us that there's more information available now than there has ever been, and that information is consumed. So there's an abundance of information, but there's still a scarcity of trust. And the real risk isn't just misinformation. It's actually about bad decisions being made by members, but these bad decisions are being taken confidently because they believe that the information that they consume is correct. So our role as advisors should be to curate, integrate, and advise members and improve outcomes ultimately. That should be the goal. It's simple. But key to this is independence. Independence is key. And we're in a fortunate position being independent of asset managers, insurers, medical schemes. And it's not because we own everything, it's because we are able to curate, advise, govern, and integrate. Because ultimately, this is how we ensure that best advice is provided to our members.
This notion of better advice made with confidence. It's an interesting one. But why does all of this matter? In a world of where artificial intelligence is growing, where there's targeted influence and there's information overload, if there's anything that you take from this afternoon, is that the value of trusted advice increases, does not decrease in a world where there is so much information. So our final message, and we did stick to time, I'm really impressed with us, is that the future will not necessarily be defined by products, platforms, or technology alone. We want to put it to you that it will be defined by those who help people, those who help members, and those who help employees make better decisions.
Perfect. Thanks, Buchi, and thank you, everybody, for bearing with us.
Guys, well done, and I think that was really informative. I see an op-ed or something in Business Day in the morning. But I'm curious, and I don't know if anyone else in the room is as curious as I am. When people are dipping into that cash, and I know they want to set up behind us, so maybe they can initiate that process while we discuss, is what are they spending the money on? In other investments? Are they planning further for their future?
So it's a great question. We have done a bit of a survey at Alexforbes, and we are partnering with ABSA today as well. You'll see in the panel, everybody, in the next panel. So I actually managed to get some more information other than our own survey, and ABSA was graceful enough to provide us with that information. Our own survey amongst members told us they were using this two-pot savings for short-term debt repayments, mostly. Some for holidays, school fees, those kinds of things. We overlaid that with the ABSA data, and what we're finding is our members were lying to us. We see that lots of members from the ABSA data actually use that to give money to friends and family. And this talks to that socioeconomic issue that we have in South Africa. So 32% of that two-pot savings was actually going towards friends and family. This is important.
Which goes also to what you said at midnight. On the night, people were waiting to the second to withdraw.
Exactly. Our first claim was processed at, I think, 30 seconds past midnight this year on the 1st of March, as people were waiting to be able to access. And that's what was happening. The other thing is 67% of claimants were repeat claimants. So it's the same people that are claiming on a regular basis. Up to now, you could have claimed 3 times because it was 3 different tax years. And of those, triple claimants, so about 34% of those had claimed all 3 times. So you can see that this is exacerbating, it's going to continue. We see this pattern continuing into the future. So members were using it, about 20% were actually paying back short-term debt, so not everybody was lying to us, but a lot of people were using it to fund friends and family, holidays, and so and that kind of stuff.
But Iman, just interestingly, we've also, through two-part, ensured that families are better supported. People have paid for Mahadi, Lobola as part of this. So it really has been put to good use across the board.
And that is wonderful to hear. I mean, and getting married is not a gamble by any stretch of the imagination. But speaking of gambling, there is a dark side to what your data is telling you about where that money is also going.
Correct. And it talks to the high levels of indebtedness, or it contribute sometimes to high levels of indebtedness. But maybe perhaps it also talks to some of the optimism that people see. They hope they will win.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so what Buchi and Iman are alluding to,
Oh,
our data actually showed us
shows.
that many members are using this towards online gambling. So we know the prevalence and the increase in use of online gambling within South Africa, the popularity of these online gambling sites, and the accessibility of online gambling. So as employers, you should know that many of your workforce are doing this while they are at work. And the data does show that a good percentage of this money was used for online gambling as well.
And as we know, the house always wins. So the expectation is that that money,
Correct.
you got to kiss it. You got to kiss it goodbye.
Absolutely.
Which goes back to I think the point that you were making around getting good advice. I mean, we can't police the choices that human beings are going to make.
Yep.
Yeah, you only have to tell South Africans to stop doing something, and then you kind of giving us a challenge. You're giving us a challenge to some extent. But yeah.
Avishal Butsi, thank you so much.
Thank you
That
so
was
much.
an incredible presentation. So we're getting ready for our panel discussion, and for me, it is incredible how the time has just galloped on. You did save us, I think, about 5 or 7 minutes, which is great because I think that's going to be really useful for us in our panel discussion. So many themes that we need to get through, and we've got some formidable speakers joining us this afternoon. Some you might know more easily than others, but certainly together we're going to have a really enlightened and I think an incredible panel. So the title of the panel is Cautiously Optimistic. And I think it was a theme that was chosen quite carefully and deliberately. It's not the kind of optimism which is naive. It's not the kind of caution where we might feel sort of defeated. There's a tension between those two concepts, because that tension, I think, is where the majority of South Africans are living in at this moment. There is a lot that we may not have control over. And again, that can lead to a great sense of fear, anxiety, hopelessness. So we live in this kind of suspended world where every day, our expectations are tempered one way or another. But we have had institutions in the country that have held. I was at the Constitutional Court last Friday, and they issued an incredible judgment, which is going to lead to a whole process that is unprecedented in South Africa, and that involves the presidency and the impeachment process. So those institutions have held. In setting up for this, Avishal was saying there's all these crazy convergent things that are happening in Madlanga Commission, which I also cover every single morning. And you think, oh my goodness, like how rotten are we and how opportunistic are we? But we're seeing that we actually have a commission that is transparent and happening in public view. We also have institutions of law enforcement that are doing their work. Okay, yesterday, let's not talk about yesterday and the KwaZulu-Natal Magistrates Court, but let's talk about the Pretoria Magistrates Courts and other places where there's accountability. So our institutions are holding. Private capital, as we've been hearing, is ready to deploy. We've got a reform agenda in South Africa that has, I'm told, more momentum. Important, you'll back me up on this, more genuine momentum that it has had in years. And at the same time, though, we've got fiscal restraints that are real. We've got infrastructure gaps that are costly, unemployment numbers that are nothing short of a moral and economic emergency. So those are all the tensions in the space. So without further ado, let me welcome our speakers this afternoon. And Kenny Fichler, who I've had the pleasure of intersecting his path with in the past, is joining us, the CEO of ABSA, representing banking leadership, credit and risk outlook, and the real-time barometer of the South African economy. Please give him a warm welcome. It's lovely to see you again, Kenny. Thank you. Anyway, Davy de Villiers. You always expect CEOs to be so stiff, but they're actually really cool people, as is Davy Toppy. Davy de Villiers, I guess, who needs no introduction, representing long-term capital, retirement outcomes, and institutional stewardship. So, Davy, it's up to you to talk about the long game, and thanks again for having me. Appreciate that. And then, this woman, I guess, needs no introduction. Busi Mabuso, who is the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, a strident and vocal voice in South African politics, representing organized business, the policy interface, and the reform agenda. Organized business's voice is in the room where it matters. Busi, it's lovely to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ma.
Okay, so our timer is on. And to our online audience, if you do have thoughts and if you do have questions, please do feel free to pose those. I will get them here and I'll put them to our panel. Again, I think we meet at a very interesting time. But then somebody would say, well, last year, the same time was an interesting time. When is it not an interesting time in South Africa to talk about anything? But I think let's aim for a discussion that meets the needs and the expectations of the diverse range of people that are in the room. People who are representing member interests or institutions, some of your clients as well. Before we talk about optimism, let's start then with the baseline, okay? If you had to give, and did you guys swear on, I mean, you don't have to swear on the Bible or anything, because maybe you don't believe in that, but we all raise our hands to tell the truth, the honest truth as we see it from our perspective, because again, we can't have things that are sugar-coated. If we can have a real and robust discussion, let's have it here today, and I know that you have the courage to do that. But if you had to give South Africa an honest assessment today, not for any of your press releases, or even for an investor, Busi's rolling her eyes, or even for an investor roadshow, but for this room where everybody knows the real story, where do you actually think we are? And Kenny, I'll give you the first bite. Busi, because I want to save the best for last.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that question, and good afternoon, everyone. I mean, I think the country is trending in a positive direction. There's no doubt about that. I mean, despite how low some of the figures are, if you compare them to the previous decade, there's a significant improvement. I mean, the GDP growth of 1.1% last year is very low, but it is higher than the average for the last 15 years. Just think about that. The sort of load shedding, I mean, this time about 2 years ago, we were worried, I mean, the electricity would have gone at least 3 times in this room.
Apparently 366 days today.
Absolutely, over a year, just over a year without load shedding. So that's a good improvement. Think about some of the improvement that we're seeing through Transnet, the improvement in the movement of goods and services. I think those are trended in the positive direction. Having said that, though, we still have massive challenges. From an infrastructure maintenance point of view, a GDP growth rate of 1.1% is just not good enough. It is still way below the population growth rate, which effectively means that we're not eating into unemployment, we're not creating more jobs, we're not expanding the productive capacity of the country. We still have challenges of corruption and crime and a whole range of other issues related to misgovernance. So clearly we are trending in a positive direction, but we still have a lot of work to do as a country. And unless we can deal with these issues, I think the country would not be able to realize its potential and ultimately contribute towards the improvement of the quality of lives of South Africans.
I guess as I listen to you, I think the answer depends on who we're asking, if we're trending in a positive direction. You know, if you're asking somebody who's living with service delivery problems for a decade, or, you know, no access to proper healthcare, again, it's very interesting that the perspectives are different depending on where we sit in South Africa. Davi?
Yeah, firstly, I don't have to swear because we believe in best advice, so I have to tell the truth. But, you know, I'm on Kenny's side. I'm naturally optimistic. You know, I loved Luke's way of saying that the two contradicts. I'm naturally optimistic, and I can tell you in January, I came back and I thought this is going to be the best year ever. All the stars was aligned. You're seeing a decline in interest rate, which prices assets much better. You know, corporates, everything works, and you started seeing arrests being made. You know, of the right people at the right level. So you know, those are all things that we didn't have a while ago, just a few months ago. You know, so that was great. Unfortunately, I think. The world is now a different place with the war, and because of the effect that it has on macroeconomic conditions. That's my worry. I think SA Inc. is on a positive trajectory. I agree. There's lots of positive things happening, and the closer you get to the action in terms of understanding what is happening behind the scenes, and Busi will know more than the rest of us, you know, the better you feel and the more positive you feel, and I think that's encouraging. For me, the fear is, and we're all investors, that's why you're here, you know, long-term capital investors, And I think my fear is the derailment of the macroeconomic intactness that we had in the beginning of the year because of potential growth. We can talk about that again, but if we don't have declining interest rates, we don't get a 3% longer-term GDP growth, we don't target the 3% inflation, that has a very negative effect on the way that the markets is priced, and that will have an effect on capital flows and sentiment, because it is ultimately the pocket of the individuals. So for me, that is the fear rather than the structural changes that is happening in South Africa.
Interesting, Pussy.
So I definitely agree with Davi and Kenny. So we are trending in the right direction. If I were to give us a score without comparing it to previous years, I'd probably maybe say we're sitting between 5 and 6%, 5 and 6 out of 10. So probably maybe 5.5. And I think really, for me, the most important thing that is happening in the country right now, the structural shifts that we are making, Iman, in terms of improving our trading environment. Davi speaks about the global shocks, the geopolitical flux that we're actually facing. We can't control that. We can control only what we're doing in our country, and that is precisely what we're doing, because we need to find a way of how we fortify our domestic environment. We need to find a way of how we make ourselves more attractive. We need to find a way of addressing the challenges that we actually face in this country. And I think the reform work that is currently underway seeks to precisely achieve that. And I think that is the most sustainable way in which South Africa is going to change its economic trajectory. So we might not see, to a large extent, probably maybe the tangible results on the ground. A lot of people will tell you that they probably maybe don't see this positive impact. But the fact that there is that intentional interventions of changing the way South Africa functions by bringing in the private sector participation in the critical sectors of our economy is definitely a positive shift in the right direction.
It was not by accident that I talked about, the story of South Africa, depending on whom you're asking. Because, I'm interested when your investors, for example, are making a determination on South Africa's health or risk when it comes to putting their money in. Where are they looking? Some South Africans, if you trust social media, you'll think everybody's watching the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry and listening to Judge Mbuyiseli Madlanga say, this is the tip of the iceberg, what's happening in Ekurhuleni and happening in Tshwane, this is nationwide. And we know, again, how the broken window works, that it becomes corrosive, pervasive, and corruption hollows out any gains that we can make as a country. And it does actually affect our bottom line. It affects our ability to grow. So how do you know where your investments, your investors particularly are looking, and how do you manage the concerns that you think they might be expressing and having?
I think that's a very important question, but what we tend to do is to look at it in the following manner. What are the positive sort of signs that we're seeing in the economy? Because that helps us to also decide where we should be landing, where the client opportunities are, and what we should be pursuing, and so on. And there is no doubt that there's still a lot of opportunities out there. Opportunities, whether it's at the back of renewable energy initiatives, huge interest in participating in the sort of a reform of the logistics sector in South Africa. And you can see the number of international players who are willing, who have submitted bids and want to participate in that particular space. So there's no doubt that there's a story behind all the reforms that are taking place, and investors are buying into it. But investors are also cautious. I think they'll be foolish if they're not cautious. They will lose a lot of money. So they have to be choosy as well in terms of where they invest. And they tend to focus on those sectors that they think are backed by real structural reform. They focus on those sectors that they think are under leverage, good sort of quality rating, a lot of secured sort of lending, and we do the same as banks. But there's underinvestment in sectors that are considered to be highly leveraged, and there's underinvestment in some of the sectors that should be driving economic growth. Think about the SMME sector. Lending and exposure to that sector is still grossly underweight and is not picking up at a fast enough rate. So I would describe then investor sentiment as being encouraged by the structural reform, positive in some respect, but it is still speculative in that people are buying an option with the hope that South Africa will improve and you'll start to see real investment in fixed capital formation. I think when we start to see that improving from the current 15% to circa 25%, then you'd know that investor sentiment has shifted quite significantly.
And I think you're moving more to the cautious optimism that we don't want to see, where it's more restrictive than people saying, well, we'll take a risk anyway and see how it plays out. The obstacle to the kind of investment that you're talking about, in a word or two, what are they?
We need to see accelerated implementation of some of the structural changes. We need to see a sense of urgency on some of the actions that ought to be taken. And ultimately, we need to get our GDP growth rates to be above 2%. It's only when we start to see that we'll be able to create jobs, eat into unemployment rates, and suddenly develop confidence that is far more sustainable into the long term.
Darby, your institution's mandate is to protect the long-term financial well-being of members, many of whom are ordinary South Africans. They don't follow the rand-dollar exchange rate. They don't read the medium-term budget speech. They're not following the budget speech. What does the outlook feel like when you translate it out of the macro and into their lives?
Yeah, I firstly wanted to touch on what Kenny said. There's a massive disconnect, and that's why we're struggling, even in this debate, to give a score. There's such a massive disconnect. There's lots of communities that don't even have access to fresh water in South Africa. Hammanskraal, it's right here. And I mean, that's a basic need that a country of our size and our wealth should have. It's not even a question. So that disconnect, and then you sit with institutions like I can call our banks, our insurers, our retailers that are world class, with hands tied behind their backs in terms of resources, capital, infrastructure, and competing with the best in the world. And that disconnect makes it difficult, makes it very difficult. My view is that on behalf of our clients, and capital is now becoming, if I call capital a person, is now becoming choosy in terms of where to deploy that capital and how to deploy that capital. Because you still have choice, and you still see excellence in South Africa, and therefore we haven't seen money run out of the country, despite a community not having water, despite Mhlanga Commission. You haven't seen run, but we're not getting the new assets. We're not getting the new assets. And for our members to get proper returns over time, to get consistency, to get value up until retirement, we need that growth, we need consistency, we need reforms to start coming through, so that it's not just a institution that does the best with it can and eke out a little bit of return for the stock market. It must be a systematic return that comes through, because our members are exposed to the whole market. So our job as that owner of that capital is to start looking more cautiously and more at the potential for that capital to grow over time, and it isn't everywhere. And I think when the banks lend out money, when we invest into stocks and into different sectors, even private markets, infrastructure development, that's the buzzword. You can't go everywhere. You have to go on behalf of your members, and that is what we have to get right in South Africa. We're not going to get new flows until that isn't investable. And we have to look after our members. They don't understand. We must make the call for them. Therefore, we have to make the right calls on what we see in front of us and for the next decade.
I read an interesting statistic. I was interviewing the NPA this morning about trust in the police, unrelated but related. It's at an all-time low. I think it's at around 24% right now. There are a lot of institutions in the country that South Africans would have a trust deficit with. Some might say it could be in justice, some might be in your local councillor, in your political party. How would you rate, and I'm interested in your perspective particularly, the trust that they have, and sometimes maybe it's a gun-to-head trust, you don't have an option, that members, investors have in your ability to manage their money well for the long term?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think that's where the disconnect members have figured out, and even if they are not as educated, they figured out that there's a few places where they can trust, and if they can trust, they can, they trust, they trust that you will do the right thing, and then it comes with consistency over time in terms of delivery, and then there's no more questions. The disconnect with what's happening in the country and distrust in the police, and so the institutions and the quality of the institutions in South Africa, and that policy framework gives them comfort. So we certainly have not, in the last number of years, with lots of negativity in the South African environment, had questions about portfolio returns.
And then I guess I would say long may it last for you and for your members.
One thing that I can say, sorry, I want to hear from the experts as well, but the fact that when should you have, when is the upside the most is when you have the worst experience. Police, it's now at an all-time low because of things happening. So from here, that's normally, if we look at the markets, when people have the least confidence, it's normally when the bull market starts. So my little bit of optimism that I want to bring to the table is, yes, it's chaos out there, in a word, but let's monitor it from here on.
Some who are not prepared to stay and monitor or to be cautious are some of the people you've written about recently. Busi, you talked about Nissan, and some of you might have already seen that, announcing that $45 million investment to expand their manufacturing capacity. And boy, do we need manufacturing, because that's where our growth numbers typically used to come from. I mean, sometimes it'd be in mining, and we'd have a commodity cycle bounce, and we get a little bit extra from there. But manufacturing really, a centrifuge for economic growth. And it is a loss. That was a major loss to South Africa.
It was.
We've already hemorrhaged automotive investment in South Africa. So the question for you is, while this move, definitely does hurt, Egypt didn't win it by accident. It has been systematically building an industry policy environment, that attracts this sort of capital. South Africa keeps losing these races, and then we debate why we keep losing. At what point does the conversation shift from diagnosis to a concrete ask? What is the specific ask that you are placing at government's feet right now?
I think we make the mistake as a country of thinking that investors, businesses, capital in South Africa is actually going to act differently, because capital all over the world, Iman, is actually governed by the same rules. They want to look at risk, they want to look at scalability, they want to look at return, they look at confidence, they look at regulatory rigidity, and so forth and so forth. And if we don't provide that environment, then as Davi said, capital has got a lot of addresses, and if our address is not attractive, then they actually go elsewhere. So it's actually unfortunate, and I think it speaks volumes that Nissan chose to go and expand their operations in Egypt versus South Africa. So we are actually seeing the serious erosion of industrial capacity. And when you look at it, it's as a result of a whole lot of own goals. Our environment is clearly not providing what capital would actually like to see at the moment. Yes, there is progress, but there is a lot of structural constraints as well, that we're just failing to address. We keep on introducing legislation that is actually not conducive for capital. We are not responsive enough, to some of the issues that capital is raising. We fail to understand that a whole lot of these investment decisions, Iman, are actually not made in South Africa. The JSE is about 60% foreign owned. So those foreign boards that make these decisions are not sentimental. Capital is not sentimental. They look at the practical realities of what it's going to mean, to invest in South Africa versus in other countries. But again, Kenny spoke about it. If you look at the low growth trap that we currently have in our environment, just from an average growth perspective of the emerging economies, those economies are growing at about 4%. South Africa is at 1.1%. So I think there are a whole lot of those factors that can be taken into account, in terms of where they actually put their money. And I think the Nissan example and the Nissan decision is actually, they are not going to stand on podiums and say it's because of all of these things. But I think if we are very deliberate, intentional, and are actually willing to listen to what is not being said, those are precisely the things that we actually should be focusing on and be trying to address.
But what's
as a
puzzling
country.
is, this is not the first time I've heard you speak. This is not the first time I've read your writing. This is not the first time you've expressed these sentiments. But you are in the room with government and you represent formidable interests. So why aren't things changing? Who's not listening?
It's not landing quickly enough. So as much as we are seeing the progress from a reform perspective, Kenny spoke about the acceleration of those reforms, because again, capital is not going to be sitting with cash reserves in their balance sheets, waiting for South Africa to get their house in order. If the reforms are actually not moving fast enough, then they look at where else are they actually going to invest their capital. And obviously, the Nissan decision speaks volumes in as far as that is concerned. And I think from a regulatory perspective, there is something that is probably maybe just not still landing. And I honestly don't understand in terms of, I don't know, do we write legislation for the environment that we'd like to have, or are we writing legislation for something? When you look at the NHI, for example, when you look at the changes that we're making to BBBE, when you look at the regulatory rigidity that you actually have in this country, whether you take the Starlink example or whatever the case is, it says, to me, it says to capital that we are just not being responsive. We stand on podiums and we say South Africa is open for business. We've just started the South African Investment Conference. We're trying to bring 2 trillion rands into the country in the next 5 years. But are we actually being responsive, and are we actually listening to what capital would like to see? To a certain extent, from a reform perspective, yes, but regulation, we are probably the most heavily regulated, environment in the continent, and we continue to be so. So I think that part, is still going to continue to hold us back.
I want to move on from the topic, but there is a question from Stuart. Is business leadership hard talking with government on NHI, on BBBE and the like?
We definitely are. I mean, we are screaming as loud as we actually can. I spoke to the DTIC minister, I think about a week ago, where I wrote a letter to say, Minister, I would like to sit down and talk to you so that we can show you the unintended consequences of the policy that you've actually just put in place. There is something fundamental that you are missing in terms of what you're actually doing. Do you understand how it's going to impact industry? Do you understand how it's going to impact the investment decisions and so forth and so forth? So we definitely are having those conversations, Iman, but yeah, it's landing by and large partly on.
All right, so that's one side of the coin. Kenny, let's bring it to you, because sometimes cautious optimism becomes a way of not really committing. Is there a version of South Africa's story where the private sector collectively is simply too cautious? I mean, we can understand, you're reading certain signs and it kind of dampens your risk appetite. But where the risk appetite of capital itself becomes a constraint to growth.
I think if we look at South African corporates, the reality is that they already have a massive exposure to South Africa. So we don't have a choice. It's not a question of whether we're optimistic or not, because we have massive exposure to South Africa. Just speaking for ABSA, over 80% of our balance sheet is exposed to South Africa. So we are invested in ensuring that South Africa succeeds. And therefore, as we engage with all of these issues, we have to be cautious in terms of where the opportunities are, where do we extend credit. But when everything is said and done, the success of South Africa is critical to the success and sustainability of ABSA as an institution. So when we engage with government as part of organized business or directly as an entity, we tend to focus on the following issues. I think the first issue, we acknowledge that there's no country that is perfect. You can go anywhere in the world and you talk to business community there, they'll have a list of their own complaints. So that's not the issue. The issue, though, is, are we collectively focused on ensuring that we make South Africa competitive? And I think that's the issue that some of the decision makers do not understand, that this is a competitive environment. We have to position ourselves and create an environment where our country, despite all the problems, despite all the challenges, where we're more competitive relative to other countries and so on. And that is where focusing on things that matter, ensuring that we can execute on those as quickly as possible becomes absolutely important, because you can't fix everything overnight, but choose what you want to focus on and make sure that you do it as quickly as possible. We do so in business. We don't take 10 years to fix a business that is broken. Otherwise we'll go under, we'll be out of business. But it takes government forever to to fix a broken municipality, a broken government department, to change legislation that's not working and so on. So I think that sense of urgency and putting the right people in the roles so that they're able to do the job very well is something that is missing in the current equation. Having said all of that, though, we continue to engage. We can see the direction of travel, but we think we can move much more quicker. And business need to lean even more to government to accelerate that pace.
Oh, I wish the clock would slow down, but it can't, because I was going to follow up and talk about that's pushing the privatization agenda. You can have the unions, but that will lead us down another different rabbit hole. And maybe for a follow-up gathering, Dawie. But how would you rate the actual institutional capacity or credibility of South Africa right now, Dawie? Not the potential, not the aspiration, but the current reality. So all of these frameworks that govern, fiscal policy, monetary policy, regulatory oversight, are they strong enough to anchor long-term confidence?
And again, I just want to touch on what the two of them said. It's such an important point because, before I go there, why did Nissan leave? Yes, and nobody will say nothing. But at the heart of it, you run an organization, it's full of employees. You've got a manufacturing plant. Those employees don't have water, don't have electricity, don't have transport. And if they do, they pay to the next. It just can't work. Just at that level. Never mind anything else that is thrown against them to operate in South Africa. The high level, the commitments, the safety to operate, the regulatory environment, none of that. That you actually come to South Africa and you accept that you're going to take that. But if your employees with basic services and the business goes under, it's not a wishful thinking. And until government doesn't see it that way, that how quickly did Eskom get fixed when there was a will to fix it? And the will doesn't matter what the reason was, there was a reason. And they fixed it. They wanted to fix it. And within a year, it's fixed. So if there's a will to fix water, to fix transport, to fix law and order, it will happen. So I must ask the question, it's not fixed, so therefore there's no will. And there's no KPI, and there's no urgency, and there's no drive. And until we don't do that, businesses can't do business in South Africa. Even us that are 100% South African, and South Africa Inc., and we depend on South Africa, it's getting more and more difficult because you need those tailwinds. So sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I wanted to complete that circle because, we can't run away from that basic delivery that government has to do. And I think as business, the one thing everybody must understand, and I we always talk about the friends around the braai, and then you have the honest discussions.
Yeah.
But I have to tell my friends always that it's better to be at the table than not to be at the table. Bushi, we weren't at the table. Now we're at the table. So is government listening yet? Is it urgency enough yet? Not. But we're at the table, and it's already improving. I think the next level is when we get to a place where we can say, okay, we want to make a few demands of, fix this by year as a collective.
I mean, it's so interesting. Two things come to mind. I don't know if you read Nyati Mteto's op-ed recently around, and he's been documenting as well, just how they managed to achieve, and well lauded in South Africa, the turnaround at Eskom, as I say, 366 days today without load shedding. And he was also, sadly, also talking about the fact that maybe we're not asking the right experts to assess the health of Eskom. It was a gargantuan, titanic effort to bring it to the position that it is today. But that story, I think, is an important one. It sounded like you were leading up to something. I mean, the frustration that you're sharing suggests to me that the way that you are going to engage with government is going to change sometime really soon. How do you do that, Dawie? Is that what this is leading up to? Because as you say, everything that has been tried hasn't worked in the way that you've envisaged.
Look, I think it's like every relationship, and again, Bushi is much better placed than me to say it, but it's like every relationship. We had a business, government, much stronger position than we were at the past.
Yeah.
And now you push it to the next level. So I don't think there's going to be a massive intervention, but gradually we must improve. We must ensure that the right people are around the table, for the new and to keep on changing. But business won't stop pushing because it is our livelihood and it's the livelihood of our clients in order to operate here. So selfishly, business won't stop. So I can give you that guarantee. And the language at the table is already changing. So that's good.
Okay, to be a fly on the wall. To have a seat at the table. But again, to go back, and maybe both you and Kenny can comment on this. We always talk about, and I remember Pravin Gordhan saying this famously, over and over, we have the best policy, we just have the worst implementation in South Africa. My understanding of that is, well, then, if you can't implement a policy, then it's a rubbish policy. So that's that on that, as the kids say. However, we do have a series of policies. Is execution where good policy goes to die in South Africa, honestly speaking?
Absolutely. I think definitely the biggest failure and weakness in South Africa is not necessarily our policies. We've got sound policy intention, but very weak implementation. But then you probably maybe need to go back and say, why is that? We keep on speaking. And I think this is one of the biggest failures and probably weaknesses that we have in our environment. You have a lot of weak institutional capacity in many pockets of government. When you look at why the city of Joburg is failing, it's precisely because you have the wrong people in power. And I really think that we can try and push as much as we can, as government, we can put the reforms in place and whatever the case is, but someone at some point is probably going to have to implement and institutionalize whatever work that we've actually done. And that is our biggest fear at the moment as business, Iman, because we've actually had this business-government partnership. We have actually done a lot of work, supported Operation Vulindlela, put reforms in place. These now have to be institutionalized, by Eskom, by Transnet, and whatever the case is. And we worry that as we plan to step away, are they actually going to see this to its logical conclusion? And I think that's the conversation we're having. How do we protect against reform stall? How do we actually ensure, that as we gear ourselves up, as we're doing at the moment as business, to lean in and assist with the city of Joburg, as soon as we actually step away from that, is the city of Joburg going to continue to be able to function? And I really think it speaks to the professionalization of the public service that the president has actually been talking about. So, if you have useless people in these institutions, if you don't have the right people in government, if you don't have CFOs who understand the difference between income and cash, it doesn't matter, what you do, we are definitely going, you can put the best strategy in front of them. They are going to fail at an implementation perspective precisely because they don't know what they are doing. Someone was actually saying that when you look at why government is failing, it is less about corruption. I don't agree. It is less about corruption. It is more about incompetence. So if we have diagnosed that the problem is incompetence, what are we doing about it? And I really think that government is not moving enough in as far as that is concerned. That is why we get overtaken by other countries who are less sophisticated, less diversified, less resilient, less stronger in the African continent, precisely because we are refusing to get our house in order, or at least are not doing so fast enough when it comes to issues like that.
The journalist in me wants you to name names. A pregnant pause? No, okay. But the State of the Province address is being delivered tomorrow by the mayor. I guess you won't be attending.
No, definitely not.
Okay. Again, time is just not our friend, and there's so many other themes that I wanted to get through this afternoon. He has a question from Elton online, and anyone can take this if you like. With the first third of the year past, and taking into consideration the U.S.-Middle East war and the global consequences, is our investment growth still sound up to now? What is the outlook, prognosis for the rest of the year? I know that Mpho would have touched on some of these themes during her presentation, but any thoughts?
I think there's a big risk coming to South African GDP performance this year. We can see, in our own portfolio, where there's delayed drawdown facilities that have been approved, meaning that companies still want to invest, but they're delaying that final step of actual drawdown and committing to investment decisions. So there's a risk there. So I think the sooner this crisis ends, the better. Because in an uncertain environment, it's extremely difficult for investors and companies to make long-term investment decisions because they do not know what will happen. Having said that, though, there is still appetite for South Africa. We went to the debt capital market, offshore debt capital market as ABSA. Our issuance was 6 times oversubscribed. So there's huge appetite for good quality investments in South Africa. We just have to take advantage of that as and when those opportunities present themselves, even though there are risks that we have to contend with and manage. And I think Mpho presented the transmission mechanism to inflation and interest rate investments.
And that's really incredible to hear because, again, the way that South Africa is framed and presented sometimes can be so parochial. We're so bogged down with the bad news of the day, we don't even get to what the investment horizon is looking like. We're almost out of time, but Davi, South Africa's retirement funds collectively hold, and this is such a large sum of money, it makes my toes curl, 5 trillion rand in assets. The banking sector, of course, one of the most sophisticated on the continent. When you were talking about Nissan and that, that investment going to Egypt, I'm thinking we're always the merry-go-rounds and the swings in terms of our ratings as being the top investment destination and most successful economies on the continent with Egypt and Nigeria. So it's just sad that it went there. But these are not passive bystanders, right? The banking sector and our retirement fund capability, they're agents. Is the financial sector doing enough, Davi, or are we moving capital in ways that are safe for the institution but insufficient for our country?
I don't think so. Our goal is to do the best for our shareholders with some of our money and our clients with the other money, and that is rigorous. That is very rigorous. Kenny can talk for himself, that's not light music, that's rigorous, and therefore the capital is employed and it has to be employed. You have the capital, you have the money invested, you have to employ it, and it's employed to the best of our ability. So the problem with infrastructure development, new cash coming in, is exactly the execution.
Yep.
It's not the amount of capital that's availability or the access to capital or the willingness to invest the capital. Your question in a direct sense, for investors going forward, for our clients going forward, firstly, luckily there is that disconnect between SA and the equity market and the bond market and institutions performing. Our view is that institutions there's lots of volatility. So, please don't quote me wrong. There's lots of volatility in the market, and Paul showed it, and it will be a rocky ride. But there's lots of value in the institutions in South Africa, in the investable universe, and even in the private market space, where Kenny has correctly said, very easy to raise debt in a South African environment if you are a quality stock. So, the clients should know that there's lots of rigor behind those investments, and we still see value in their investments.
I want to quickly pop into Regulation 28, which we did mention earlier. It's been amended now to allow some of that greater exposure to infrastructure and private markets. But is it actually changing behavior? Are retirement funds genuinely moving into infrastructure in a meaningful way?
Look, no. And there I've had a lot of debate with the Minister himself of Finance, who says, he wants to compel us to invest in these investments, and you can't do that with pension money, so I'll just say no, that's not a debate. But the capital is there. We've earmarked ourselves, multi-billions of rands for private market infrastructure development, already earmarked, already part of the mandates, already there without Regulation 28. There's just not the right investable products at the moment. That comes from municipalities delivering, if you think about infrastructure in South Africa. And until that isn't sorted, you can't invest there, because then it is hope. Then you are doing it because, you think something might get better. No capital in South Africa or in the world these days can be invested without proper knowledge of, your risk-return profile into the future.
So sadly, we are at an end, but I want to give Kenny and Busi the opportunity to fill in the sentence for me, all right, to fill in the blank. And not the conference answer, but then I don't suspect you ever will give it a conference answer. South Africa will fulfill its potential if and only if.
If we put the right people in power. It rises and falls on leadership. We have to have the right people in power. Everything will flow from there.
In The union buildings.
Government has got a lot of, if we're talking about policy issues, if we're talking about the failure of implementing some of the changes that need to be implemented, not the right environment, not accelerating reforms, it all boils down to who is making these decisions. If you have the wrong people making these wrong decisions, then it's garbage in, garbage out.
Kenny, South Africa will fulfill its potential if and only if?
Yeah, if we collectively focus on the right issues with the right sense of agency. And I agree, with Busi's point of having the right people in power. But I will broaden that. It's not just about government. I think public service and politics in general have been juniorized. These institutions are massive institutions. Whether you take cities or government departments, we have people who have never run a spaza shop, suddenly running a city, running a government department. What do you expect? It doesn't matter. Whether they are clean, they are not corrupt, or they are good, or it's irrelevant. If you have not even run a spaza top, how are you going to run a municipality the size of Joburg, or the size of PE, or a massive government department, and so on? We have juniorized the public service, and this cuts across all the political parties. I think the sooner people take public service seriously, the better it will be for South Africa.
Ravi, your final answer? South Africa will fulfill its potential if and only if?
I agree with the two of them. I've said enough. No. Right people in power. You can see it even in business. You don't have the right person, the thing doesn't work. Now businesses have got more choice for better skills necessarily maybe, and over time has had that pressure. But it's definitely not in place in the local governments and in some of the departments. And then urgency. For me, it's about execution. Policies is fine. It's about execution, actually delivery.
Well, I think you guys did an amazing job in 35 minutes. That was not bad. That's how quickly we got here. So I really want to appreciate you. All right, which leaves me about a minute to say some things to you, which I thought were quotable quotes from Busi. Capital has a lot of addresses. I think we know that, sadly. Capital is also not sentimental, so it's going to go where it understands it is best placed. And I think some of the other things that were said a little bit earlier, and this was in Mpho's presentation, we need to come to terms with uncertainty and volatility, unfortunately. So it's a new type of investor out there. The world has changed. I would say, favor tackies instead of high heels, unless you can run in them. But thank you once again, Davi, to you and your team for having me. And to all of you, thank you for making the time to be part of this. And please do stay. There's free food and drink
100%.
on offer. It is Tuesday, but the kids say we have the club going up on a Tuesday. So I have it on good authority that you can stay and enjoy yourself. And once again, thank you so much for being with us. Go well.
Thank you.